Now let's create some texture for the head. Now the head, we want to be similar to the flesh that we created down here on the body. So let's go to the body first. And we're not going to worry about the bone. That is the part that we added the mask off for this part. We're more concerned about everything else, all the other layers here. And they're kind of all just sitting out here, not in any folders or anything. And so what I want to do is package this up so that I can take this and apply it all at once to the head. So you can see we have a bunch of different layers contributing to the final look. I want to kind of put those all together and enable us to transfer that to another piece of geometry. So I'm going to go ahead and take all of these, right click, and let's say group layers. I'm going to go ahead and call this blue skin. Okay, so we've got that in its own folder. I'm also going to right click on this and I'm going to choose create smart material. And let's go ahead and jump over to our smart materials. We'll say create smart material, and you can see that there's now a new entry in the smart materials called this blue skin, just like I named the folder here. All right, so now let's jump over to the head, and you can always open that folder back up and access any of those layers on the body. So we're going to go to the head right up here, and let's go ahead and add our blue skin to our stack here. All right, so now it's taken that blue skin with all of those layers and added it to our head. Now we can go back in and start to tweak some things. And so this scaly texture, let's say that we want it to appear on some of the softer areas, but then on some of the bonier areas and maybe some areas up here, we don't want it to be as prominent, or we don't want it to be there at all. We can start to mask those out. So first I'm going to go ahead, and I think overall I'm going to take this color down a little bit. And so I'm going to kind of desaturate it a little bit. Let's also take the height, and I'm just going to bring this down just a hair, and then take the blending down a little bit. All right. I want to mask out the effect of the scales in some of these areas. So I'm going to come into this fill layer 3, and let's add a white mask. And then I'm going to come in here, and I've just got my hardness set down pretty low. The size is about 3 or 4. Okay. And then you can change this color. I also want to drive the flow based on my pen pressure. And so we can come in here and start to fade out these scales in these particular areas. So maybe up here along the brow where it's more of a bony ridge, and then maybe right along the eye there, and just start to kind of blend those back out. In here along the tooth, I mean, some of these areas are more just soft tissue. And then let's go in along the top here. I'm going to turn on symmetry, so speed things up a little bit, and just kind of knock it down in these areas up here where we may still have a little bit of it, but I want to kind of minimize that a little bit. And kind of up here along these bumps, just kind of knocking that back down a little bit. And also giving it a little bit of variation so it's not the same everywhere. Definitely don't want it to be here inside of the ear where we're going to add another kind of color in there. Just kind of blend that back in. All right, so something like that. Maybe here along the lip. Now you can see that there are other layers contributing to that scale. And so, looking at this visibility, you can see that that is part of the contribution there as well. Continue to kind of drop this out. If you go back and get like more of a black, you'll get closer to removing that altogether, which in some cases is probably good on some of these harder pieces that are kind of sticking out, the bonier pieces. But don't just go crazy and just remove it everywhere. We want to come in here and remove that. All right, so something like that. Now let me go also grab, before I had my symmetry on, I didn't get this side, so let me go ahead and do that. along the eye. And I'm making this type of detail. As long as you understand what we're doing, feel free to kind of make the detail your own. Kind of soften that up. Now I want to add some more color and sort of make this a little bit shinier. So I'm thinking about these areas that are more exposed. They would be like a shinier, fleshier, wet kind of a look, and maybe a little bit more red. And so let's create a new layer. And I'm just going to create a new paint layer right on top. All right. Now I've got symmetry turned on. My paintbrush, I'm going to go ahead and choose kind of a red. And knowing that we have blend modes to work with, I'm not going to worry too much about getting the red perfect. I'm going to come down, and I don't need height right now, but I'll leave everything else as is. I'll come down here and change some of the channels. So height, I'm going to set that to 0. Roughness, I'm going to make this roughness a little bit lower, so it's a little bit glossier. And the metallic I'll leave as is, and we can test this out. So what I want there to be is kind of a shinier look to it. And you can see right there, there is. All right, and so I'm going to come in here and start to fill in this ear area with this sort of red, shiny look. Okay, and I'll just kind of come up against where it kind of looks like it's coming up against the side there. Come in like that. Okay, I can also change the roughness. I can change the color, maybe lighten up certain areas. I can also come in here and go get a brush. So let's go get a brush, and let's do a kind of a spotty pattern. So let's do these dots, and then I'm going to take this to more of a pink, get a smaller brush size, and then start to add this detail in here. So now we're adding that color and roughness, but we're doing it with a spotty sort of looking brush. And again, you can make the look of this whatever you want. I'm trying to kind of make something I can blend back in later. So let's go back in and get a different color. We'll maybe change the hue this time, and let's do it to more of like a purpley kind of a color, or pink. Start to layer these things on top of each other. So I can go ahead and do that. We can also experiment now with blending this back in. So I can use the opacity of this. I could also, if I wanted to blur the edges out, I could go ahead and add a filter. Let's add a blur filter. You can see we can bump that blur up so it blends back into the surface a little bit more. So something like that. We could also, while we're in here, going back to that layer with our brush, we could change the height. So if we wanted to make it bumpy or maybe pushed into the surface a little bit, we could go back in, and now keep in mind that it's being blurred, and so you're not getting the full effect. Let's decrease it a little bit more. But we can come in here and start to break things up a little bit. If I turn off the blur, you can see what that looks like. So, you may want something more like this. We can also take the height down a little bit more, decrease that so it's a little bit darker, so we get areas that look like they're sort of pushed in down here, and then get kind of a lighter pink and raise the height. So those are sort of popped up, and you can start to really create some neat effects. Now, if you like all the dots there, then you don't want to blur it as much. You can see that blurs everything out. If you go back to the blur, start to decrease that, you can start to get different effects. Or you can find that the blur, like the blur right now is barely on. We can also still blend this back into the head so it looks a little bit more natural. I want to do the same thing up here on the sort of the nose piece. So let's go back in here, and I'm going to decrease my height, my size rather, change this back to a red. And I want this in here to be a little more of that fleshy look as well. And I can go back in here and turn off the claws so that I can see kind of all the way down here. So I'll go ahead and kind of fill that in all the way down. And again, you could make this another layer too, like for if the blend mode or the blur for the ear isn't working too well for you for the nose, then all you have to do is just make a new layer. Then you don't have to worry about that. You can dial them in completely separately. Okay. We can kind of come in here and tweak that a little as well. I also want to start to add a little bit of blush on some of the thinner fleshy parts, especially around the eye. And so let me go ahead and turn the claws back on here. Let's make a new layer for this, a new paint layer that is. I'm going to go back and get just a basic soft brush, and I'm going to choose red. The height, I'm going to make it 0. The roughness, I'll turn that up a little bit. And now I want to come in and paint around the eyes. So just the lid, kind of like that. Okay, so kind of like that. And it'll just come out a little bit. All right. Now let's go ahead and add a blur. We'll turn the blur up a little bit. And then you can choose to kind of experiment with some of the blending modes. There's the screen mode, overlay. You can see kind of darkens things up, multiply, and there's normal. Let's try normal and it'll just dial down the visibility of it. So maybe something like that. And you can always go back and erase parts of it if you want. So let's get it to this point where we have the scales added. We have some ear texture painted. We have some kind of glow or blush painted around the eyes where it's red. And then you've also got the sort of nose part painted. Let's get this far and then we'll go ahead and continue to work on the head in the next clip.